Um, yeah, so we were talking about driving up and down 77 from Ohio, and I did the same thing to Michigan. And so when we were leaving, every time we went by Pilot Mountain, it was like, what is going on with that? But we were only an hour and a half from home, and we had 12 more hours to go, 9 hours to go beyond it. And then when we came home, we were only an hour and a half from home. So for really 20 years, I went by it, and every time I wondered, what is the deal with that thing? Because it just sticks up out of the ground. And so one time I went and visited my dad after my mom died, and I was alone. And it was about 6:30 at night, October 2nd, 2012. And so I went up to the top of the mountain, and I took some pictures of just the big pinnacle there on the lower left. And when I got home, I saw faces on it. And I went, what in the world? And our brains make order out of chaos, so I was thinking maybe that's it. So I looked up Pilot Mountain on a Google search, and a map by Thomas Jefferson's father, Peter Jefferson, was there, and it called Pilot Mountain the Stonehead. And I went, whoa. So I went back and took a bunch of pictures close up, and well, here's a little. We'll get into that in just a second. Here's a little bit about me, which is out front. I'm an international journalist and a first-time author, and they're totally different deals. And I worked for the Detroit Free Press and Variety for quite a few years. Got to interview Aretha Franklin for 3 hours in her home. That was a real thrill. And Neil Young arranged an interview with Willie Nelson about the first Farm Aid, and that ended up on the front page of the Detroit Free Press. And so my parents didn't know that, and they opened up the paper and went, my son's on the front page. Yeah, and here's some variety stuff. I did Roger McGuinn, John Prine, and Aretha Franklin in the same issue. Um, and even got to talk to B.B. King. We went to a prison concert together. I had nightmares for about 3 months after that. But so yeah, this is what you see from 77 coming down, and that's what I saw that day, October 2nd, 2012. And so it's I always have trouble pronouncing that, Monadnock, which means it's a separate mountain away from all the other mountains. And so this is that first picture I took, and see how there's the faces there? They're all facing south in profile. Up on top, it looks like the guy has a hat on, and that's what really got me interested. I showed this to a Cherokee wisdom keeper named Freeman Owl. I went to the North Carolina Museum of History, and it was during the Native American month. And I had an 8 by 10, and I said, "Do you see the stone faces there?" And he's holding it, and he's going, "No, nope." And I'm just kind of going, "Oh, come on." He goes, I said, "Do you see? There's 7 faces there. There's only 6 there. The 7th one's down below there, but." And he looked at it. He goes, "No, I see 12." It's like, oh, okay. So, and every time I take somebody with any kind of Native American background, they always see way more than I do. But once again, that's your brain making order out of chaos too. Although some of these stretch that a little bit. So this is the map by Peter Jefferson and Joshua Fry. They did the survey in 1749, and then it was published in 1752. And this was the map that like the Moravians used to come down to North Carolina down the Great Wagon Road. And so there it is. He called it Mount Ararat for the Europeans, and then the Stonehead for the Native Americans. And along that Yadkin River, they have determined there's about 60 villages that were there. And they were on maps until about 1801, and then they disappeared. The people didn't, the villages didn't disappear, but they were off the map. which is very interesting. And they're doing a lot of archaeology stuff on the Yadkin River, but also the Ararat River too. Um, so yeah, this is how I got inspired. I saw the stone faces and then saw that it was the stone head. And then I went back after October 2nd, and I'm not sure what day it was. I think it was like October 6th or something like that. And I stopped for gas at the Pinnacle gas station, which is about 3 miles from the mountain. And there was an old timer with bib overalls on, looked like right out of Andy Griffith's show. And he was sitting on the curb with a Diet Pepsi, so I gassed up and went in, got a Diet Pepsi, and came out and sat next to him. And I said, "Do you have any stories about Pilot Mountain? I'm really curious about it right now." And he said here locally that you should take your moccasins off within 20 miles of Pilot Mountain because the land is so sacred to them. And I was off to the races. That, those three things really got me curious. And so it was those three factors. And then as I'm doing the research, it really generated a lot of controversy and debate with the North Carolina Division of Natural and Cultural Resources once I published the book. And it's one line that I used 7 times in the book that they really take objection to. And I have a feeling one of you is going to ask me that same question it was in my book. I've actually revised it and taken it out because it doesn't really matter to me that much. It does to them though. And I've been trying to get into this is a conference about ancient history that happens in Greensboro, and I went this year as a vendor, and I'd been talking back and forth about speaking with them for a year and a half, and he of course said, when I said that it was a pyramid, he said I thought he was out of his mind. And it's interesting. I think that's the same thing that the North Carolina Division of Parks and Recreation is thinking too, that he's just out of his mind. But so the research went on for 11 years. I went to the Wilson Library, the Mount Airy Regional History. So many. I figure I've went about 60,000 miles doing research within North Carolina about this. One supervisor I used to have said that when I get an issue, I'm like a junkyard dog and I don't let go, and that's certainly true. I'm still doing research on Pilot Mountain, and I'm real happy it's in the Museum of History, and it's right below a friend of mine, Rufus Edmondson's book too. And it's curious that the museum is run by the North Carolina Division of Parks and Recreation. They won't sell the book at Pilot Mountain, but they do sell it at the museum, which is okay. And my first book signing was at Bob Timberlake's gallery. He really likes Pilot Mountain, and as soon as he heard about it, he said, "Why don't you come and do a book signing?" And that was really successful too. And so the local TV station in Winston-Salem has taken a real interest in the book. In fact, they contacted me yesterday and they want me to go up on the mountain with them and do a remote television thing on the equinox. So yeah, that's what Pilot Mountain looked like in 2012. And it doesn't look like that anymore. It's really amazing. And this is what happens on the equinox. There's a little notch right there, and it lights up about 40 minutes after the sunrise, and that's significant because of the green corn ceremony that the Native Americans had. When they harvested the corn, they would give thanks and ask for forgiveness of the Great Spirit, and I think some of that was done right on Pilot Mountain. So yeah, this in yellow is the Occaneechi Trail. It's the trading path. So Hillsboro is right up here, and they would go along to get to Pilot Mountain there. And then that course goes beyond. That goes up like 52 up into Wisconsin. And they would walk all that way. It's amazing. So if they went to the green corn ceremony, they'd leave about probably the 14th of September. It would take about 5 days to walk, and they would go over 22 creeks and rivers to get there. And no bridges. That was back when you just had to ford the stream. So this was from the Cherokee Museum in Cherokee, North Carolina. And this is about the green corn ceremony. The festivals were times of thanksgiving and forgiveness when families, clans, tribes came together. Headmen would determine common bonds, young people would meet, marriages were arranged and performed between consenting couples, and people would display their prestige through gift giving. This would go on for 5 days, and the Cherokee during this ceremony would talk about their migration, and the migration story is 5 days long. It's what I would compare it to is, you know how we watch It's a Wonderful Life every Christmas? Well, they would do the migration story every equinox. And you would hear, if you were 60 years old, you would have heard the migration story 60 times. And that's how the oral history was transferred generation to generation. And they go back at least 14,000 years on this land. And like the Cherokee, their migration story starts in a land that's surrounded by water that you cannot drink. And it's told in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and that land is facing the east where the sun rises, which sounds a lot like Atlantis to me, but who knows?
Can't drink it.
Yeah.
Why can't they drink it?
What was that?
Why can't they drink it?
It's salt water,
Salt?
which would be unheard of in the Blue Ridge Mountains. So, yeah. So this is wild. In Pilot Mountain, I was told over and over again that the people from Texas came to Pilot Mountain to visit their ancestors that are buried there, and then they went to Ohio. And they would return each year also. They would go there and come back. And I thought that made no sense, that they'd come from the state of Texas, go to Pilot Mountain, which is kind of an elbow, you know, and go up to Ohio. It turns out in my own backyard is a Texas community of the Occaneechi. And this fooled the archaeologists of UNC also. They did a real in-depth study of a Occaneechi village on the Eno, right in downtown Hill. And the really curious thing is that William Spoon, who used to own Pilot Mountain, is the one who put Texas on the map. And I think it's because he knew that relationship with the mountain that he honored them that way. So most people see Pilot Mountain like this. I'm sure anybody who's driven by, this is what you see, or the flip side, depends on which direction you're going, north or south. But I discovered in this writing, this is a professor from UNC, he said it was a perfect triangle. That was the first one I found. And so when you look at that, it's like, where's the triangle? I don't see it. He also called it a magnificent temple. And this is in I think it was 1823 he did this. I don't think it was published until about 1828 or something like that. But, and can you imagine, he had the same issue getting to Pilot Mountain as the Indians did. There were no railroads. They would have either ridden a horse or a wagon for 5 days to get to Pilot Mountain. And President Caldwell, the first president of UNC, went with him and evidently came back quite often. So he has a very long feature that was repeatedly put in newspapers. And this is usually the artwork that they used with the UNC article. And the little white building there is the Gillum Hotel, and that family owned the motel, or owned the mountain, I'm sorry. So that's an engraving, and you know, they used to draw on wood, and boxwood, I think, because it was easy to dig out. So this was before photography, so all of that was cut out of the wood, and then where you wanted the ink was left up. So quite a task. I like being a photographer now, and it's all digital, and you just put it in the computer. But yeah, they said that drawing of Pilot Mountain probably took weeks to finish, and then it was just used over and over again. So after looking for a long, long time, I finally found it. That's the pyramid. This is from about 4 miles away, and quite often you'll read that the big pinnacle is made out of pure quartzite, 99% pure quartzite. But what they learned in 1944, the whole mountain is quartzite. And you all have quartz in your watches and in your computers, and it's all over the place. And there's very little soil too. So this is really got me going on the pyramid. The Duke University professors called it an almost perfect pyramid. And this Torrey Botanical Club is very fussy about everything you write in their journal. And so this passed that fussiness. Osling kind of complained about them that even his photography they wouldn't use because it wasn't up to their standards, and how they took him to task on different paragraphs that he had written. So here's the pyramid shadow, and this starts about 90 minutes before sunset. This is the visitor center, and the RV park is up there. That's about 2 miles from the mountain. So this really got my attention. This is my son in the picture here too. This is the pyramid shadow that goes almost to the Sauratown Mountains. That's a good 4.5, 5 miles, and it just slowly goes out. Yeah, that's the whole thing. So this is a pyramid down in Mexico, and it's Tehuacan, right outside Mexico City, and that's what it looked like in 1901, and then that's what it looks like today. They took the roots of the trees and then took the soil away too. And it's interesting because Pilot Mountain also has very little soil on it. At most, it's about a foot towards the top. Now, some of it is washed down, so it's maybe 3 or 4 feet at the base of the mountain. But pyramids were really important to humans, you know, Giza and all over the place. So I don't know if there's not a lot of research about the pyramid that I found. I'm really curious about it. So yeah, we got the stone head there, and once I got into this, I would see them everywhere. And I think I've identified maybe 85 stone faces like that. And there's a psychology term, I can't remember what it is, but it's about seeing significant things in chaos. And that very well could be what this is.
These faces were not carved or anything.
What was that?
These are natural faces, but not carved.
Bingo! That's my question is, I put in the book on the back cover, are these natural or man-made? And that's what the Park Service took huge issue with. And they said, we consider it completely natural. And each year I ask if I can do one of these talks at the mountain. And they say that would be confirming these questions you have about Pilot Mountain. And so they don't allow that. I've been refused each year since I started doing the research. Yeah, like this one is pretty amazing. And this is on the big pinnacle as you walk around on the Pilot Knob Trail. Used to be called the Cherokee Trail. So, you know, is it Hermes? Pretty amazing. So, this is an actual moai on Easter Island. Um, and I wrote Dr. Robert Schock, and his wife does photography, so she let me use this image, and so I really think these look like moai. And he said the curious thing is those notches in the back on both sides. Um, that is what is on every moai that has a top knot, and these are both facing south. And this is right near a mineral spring on the left. And it's about 2/3 of the way up the mountain. Both of them are. And these lips um, light up on the equinox, kind of whatever the color is of the sunset. And it's just this part right there that lights up. And it's just for 20 minutes that happens, but it's really interesting. So all of this, the book came out about a year ago, and I got a email on the 20th of 2024 that someone had read the book, and they had only looked at the pictures, which I would encourage everyone who got the book, just go through and look at the pictures at first. There's 120 of them, takes about 20 minutes, and there's captions to each one of them, and you can get the flavor of the stories and whatnot. But they came. There was a 4-person crew with a van load of equipment, and they filmed me for 7 hours on the mountain, and then we went over to the Pilot Knob Inn, and we did an hour interview there, and that's being readied for release right now, which is just a thrill for a first-time author. I can't believe they did that. So we'll get into the history now. This is the Gillum Hotel that was built in 1830. And this guy, his name was Andrew Mathieu. He was a Frenchman. And he owned a hotel in New York City. And there was a guy there that needed to bring goods to his business in Virginia. So they loaned him $1,800 in about 1798, 97, right around there. And he died on his way back. So he gave the deed to Pilot Mountain as collateral for however and then he died, so they just had the deed with no payback of the money. And this Frenchman decided he wanted to get out of the hotel business, so they had a card game. And when they divided the assets to the hotel in New York City, and he won it. And but he didn't know what he won. He won 9,000 acres, and one thing he won was taxes every year on 9,000 acres. But so he came down and built this home, and then they turned it into the Gillum Hotel. And there are 4 bedrooms upstairs, and they're huge. Each bedroom would have 10 people in it. They had bunk beds, and so some days they would have 40 people staying in this hotel. And I'm doing a historical fiction novel right now about that. And this was in the newspapers, and it's the Gillum Hotel right there and at the base of the mountain. And yeah, so then you had to use stagecoaches in those days, 1820, 1830, and it was like $3.50 to go to Mount Airy from Winston-Salem or wherever. This is I think this is from 1940 by Frank Jones from the Winston-Salem Journal. They've given me permission to use these. And there were all sorts of stuff going on. They had a balloon thing where somebody jumped off with Daisy the Wonder Dog. And they would have, once the train started in 1888, then they would have excursions. And that actually happens to be my birthday, April 19th. But they would wait until spring was well underway. And this is the way they used to go up the big pinnacle. Can you see on the left why they called them rickety ladders? And a little better on the right side there would be either I think it was three ladders went up. And they said it wasn't too bad going up. Excuse me. It was the coming down that was the problem. It would be the equivalent of going up the cathedral at Duke University on the outside. And so that first step down, you've got about 20 stories below you. And then if you fell, then you'd also keep going, and there's another 140 stories to go. So, yeah, and these are from the Moravian archives. They've been really helpful. And if we have a rainy day or something and you're bored, the Moravian archives are unbelievable. They're online at archive.org. And they had daily journals starting in 1752 of what happened. And it's the only record in North Carolina that's continuous. So they witnessed the French Indian War right on their property, the Revolutionary War, Civil War, War of 1812, and it's all documented daily. Unbelievable archive, and it's very exciting. Yeah, there's a close-up. Now notice everybody's wearing their Sunday best. This was a big deal. After church, you'd go up Pilot Mountain, and sometimes they had church right on Pilot Mountain. Notice the rungs missing there. So this is W.L. Spoon. He's the one who put those Texas guys on the map. Excuse me. And this is the road grader they used to do what's it called? The clay sand road up. And this was owned by Andy Griffith's best friend, who lived in Pilot Mountain, and his name was Early Gilly. And so somebody on the mountain said, you need to go see the Gillies, and I did, and they let me take this picture and put it in my book. And about a year ago, I said to them, that really is an artifact that should be on the mountain. And I was kind of the middleman between the Park Service and them, and they finally got it over there, so it's going to be displayed here someday. And on the back, you'd sit up there, see where the wheel there is, but somebody sat on the back too, and the guy driving it one time kept looking back to make sure everything was okay, and the guy on the back just said, quit looking at me, you drive, we're going up the mountain. So he got up to the top of the mountain and the guy fell off someplace. That's the way it goes. So yeah, they cleared the land, and there were all these trees on there, but they were kind of new trees. And it turns out there was gravel the whole 2 miles of this road. So Spoon thought he surveyed a new way up the mountain, but it's actually an old way. It's like the blueprint was in the mountain already, and he just rediscovered it. So who knows how old that was. Now he put stairways in, but look how steep those are. And a lot of people came down the way you usually come downstairs, but the locals turned around and did it like a ladder. And then you're looking just at what you need to do rather than looking all the way down. And so this is the man who bought the mountain from W.L. Spoon in 1944. It was actually his estate, and he bought it for $14,500. And currently it's listed in the tax records as $1.5 million, so it's gained a little. And then he passed away in 1958, and Pearl Beasley took it over. And I think they both have Cherokee heritage in their blood. And she was a really interesting woman. She was way ahead of her time. When she wanted, she got up to, I think she was like in her 70s and wanted to sell the mountain. But she told the State Park Service that if you do anything to this mountain to make it more modern, then the deed would go back to my family. And that stands today. So that's pretty cool. Now, one weird thing about this is that military planes between 2 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon fly over this and have been doing that daily since like the 1950s. And they're really loud. I've been up there when they've done that. Now it's the C-130 transports that go over it. And literally it shakes everything when they're going over it. Because see how close it is to the top of the mountain? They said back when the B-52s went over that you could set your watch. It would be 3 o'clock when they went over the big pinnacle. And when you were working in the pool below, you didn't see them coming. It just all of a sudden happened. Now here's those stairways. See, right in there, a little vague, but and then you kind of just keep going up that way on the mountain. Yeah, so and there's the stairways also. See off to the left there. And that's the owner, and that's his daughter. And she helped run the mountain after. She was a school teacher, so in the summer she'd help out. And there's the pool at Pilot Mountain, right on the side of the mountain. It was quite difficult to build. And the first chapter of my book is the grandchildren of the Beasley family. They gave me a tour of sort of the hidden aspects of Pilot Mountain. And we went to this location where the pool used to be. They've just filled it in with dirt. The pool's still there, it's covered up. And one of the women, Beverly, said when they would go in this pool, it was mineral spring water. And it was so cold that their lips would turn blue. And when that happened, the lifeguard would say, you need to get out of the pool for a little bit and warm up. And evidently you could not, there was a stairway into the pool, but you couldn't go that way. You had to dive in because it was so cold. And that was all mineral spring water right from the mountain, which used to have medicinal properties, but because of the air pollution today, that's been lost, which is kind of sad. So in about 3 weeks, they're going to start this hawk watch. And they keep track hourly, daily, and then for the whole season of all those birds. There was one day in 1992 where 9,000 broad-winged hawks went by. There were so many they had to just kind of look in the sky and just do 20 and then multiply that. They just said it was just unbelievable how many went by. And it's interesting that they're on a sort of a path that comes from Canada along the Appalachian mountains, and they come 20 miles out of their way to go to Pilot Mountain. And I think it's because of the thermals. There's so much heat that's generated from the quartzite that they come and just fly with the thermals. So yeah, I would really recommend late September, around the equinox, that week after, doing an excursion from here. It'd take about 2 hours to get up there, and it's really interesting to see all that. Yeah, and I discovered that Lester Flatt of Flatt and Scruggs wanted to have a bluegrass festival on top of the mountain. There used to be an airfield there that was at a 25-degree angle, and he wanted to have the stage at the bottom and then have the audience above them. But they wouldn't allow that. Pearl Beasley just said it would be too much trouble getting all the people up the mountain and then back down the mountain. So he bought the property at the base of the mountain and did a bluegrass festival for a number of years, almost a decade. And this is in the daytime, they had it in the woods at this little picking stage. And then in the evening, they moved to a bigger place, but it was so hot that you couldn't be out in the sun that much. So when I started there, I had a lot of trouble getting information and pulling it all together, but that seems to be changing now. The locals, talk about it being very sacred, and now there's a lot of people, the natives, Americans, are getting really interested in it also. And I think they always have been. I'm just discovering that. So I went to this Cosmic Summit and was a vendor doing book signings, and I got to meet this man. His name's Randall Carlson. He's a geologist, and he took all of my scientific studies with him back to Atlanta, and he's looking them over now. So he'll be an expert in my next book that I'll kind of lean on. Yeah, and then Scott Walter was there also. He's on the History Channel, America Unearthed. He's very interested in it too because of the pyramid aspect of it. And then this is Freeman Owl, who's been helping me with some of the oral history stories and giving me permission to publish that in the oral history book that's coming up. And this is Yona Frenchhawk, which he is really interesting. I saw, for some reason on my YouTube, I got recently added. You know how they do that on your little part of it? And there was a YouTube that had 11 views from a year ago, and it popped up in my recently added, and I watched it, and it was fascinating. And so I wrote him and said, I understand Pilot Mountain is sacred to the Cherokee, and if you ever wanted a private guided tour, I'd be happy to do that. And so he wrote me back, said, wow, that's really interesting. And then a couple days later, he said, yeah, how about next Thursday? And I said, yeah. And then a day later, he said, why don't we do it for 2 days? Do you want to get a hotel room for me? And we'll do it, go 2 days. So I went, great, yeah. And so he got there before I did, and he went up, and he's in the bird clan for the Cherokee. And I witnessed, he could hear the falcons and the turkey buzzards and stuff circling around him. And so when we met and I drove back up with him, sure enough, the turkey vultures and the falcons were right over our heads. I'd never seen it before. It was just thrilling. And he took his shoes and socks off and showed me how to do that. And one thing he said is that it doesn't matter if the faces are natural or man-made. The main point is that they're alive. And he would go up and touch them, and he would be able to talk with them. He calls it the language of nature. And he said, we all have it, but we've been taught that we don't have it. And he said, we just need to relearn that. It's not like we have to learn it for the first time. We need to relearn it. And I really encourage you to watch he's got little hour-long YouTube videos that are almost hard to find. But if you spell his name just like that, Yona, French, and then the hawk has a capital H. And so I kind of just stumbled into him, and I said, tell me about your family history. And he goes, well, I'm named after Chief Yonagusta, and he's the one who created the Eastern Band of the Cherokee that stayed and didn't go on the Trail of Tears. And then he said, further back, my relative went to England as one of the 3 chiefs of the Cherokee to meet the King of England. And so he's kind of got, his relatives were not really the chief, they were more the medicine man that's even higher than the chief and the clans. He's like, they would go to him for advice. And he, when I left him after being with him for about 36 hours, I thought he should be the Vice President of the United States. I really did. He's amazing. So I'm really wondering where the smoke signal spot is. This used to be called Signal Mountain by the Native Americans, and they did smoke signals, fire beacons, and then that mica where they do the flashing of the sunlight. And I think it's right up in the top there is where they would do that, because on that you can turn around 360 degrees and see the whole horizon. So, and there are evidently places, there's rocks placed where it shows where the solstice is for the winter and summer and where the equinox is, and both the setting and the rising of the sun. And I bet there's moon stuff too. So this is kind of the way the pyramid has been. It's been hidden in the fog, but it's there. And right where the fog ends there, there's a 16-acre flat area. That's probably where they did ceremony. I thought this was interesting. This is in the general management plan for Pilot Mountain. It's on page 5, and it is they're having the board meeting across the hall right now, and this is similar to that, where it's just like the figures for the whole year. It's a really boring document. But this is really interesting because they say that in prehistoric times, there's burials of high significance on Pilot Mountain. There's campsites, a quarry, there's rock art. Now, rock art implies that there's a human involved in it, and that's kind of my thing with the stone faces. I'm wondering, and it's interesting that they put that there's rock art of high significance, but they don't say what the rock art is. And they say shelters and caves, and there's trails, and even a village. And I'm not so sure about the village, but there's no documentation, there's no footnotes on that. My entire book has about 400 footnotes where you can check for accuracy, but this didn't have any footnotes at all. So I went looking for artifacts, and it turns out UNC doesn't have any artifacts at all for all of Surrey County, let alone Pilot Mountain. All of the counties around it, there's 5 counties around it, have tens of thousands of artifacts, but not Surrey County. And now on that highly significant, it's funny, that came out in 2018, and in 2017, the state archaeology said that to say it's highly significant or not doesn't really do much. You really have to assess what you actually have there. I thought that was kind of curious. And there's only been one archaeological study. It says it's 200 pages, but it's 187 pages. And it's restricted access, it's confidential, it has embargoed items, and I've been told that they found artifacts, and those artifacts have been put in a library, or no, a warehouse that's not available to the public. Sounds just like Raiders of the Lost Ark, you know, with the Ark of the Covenant, they put that stuff in. So I contacted the then director of the archaeology for the state of North Carolina, and he confirmed in writing that I could not photograph anything that they had, but they did have it. So that's curious. So this is going to be my next book. This is the Gillum Hotel in 1901. My book is going to be from 1830 to about 1842, and about running this hotel. And they talked about 40 people being at that hotel, and if you count, I think there's 39 people in this picture. And there's children, and there's guys gambling out front there. And notice how they're all dressed up. When you went for dinner here, you were supposed to get dressed up, but you would go on an excursion like on a cruise ship up the mountain from there. And they do it with horses. And then the book after that, my wife says I have 5 books, and I've written 3 so far. One's released and one's coming out soon. And then I'm still kind of working on this because I keep finding out more information on the oral history. like that Texas one I just found out about a month ago. And yeah, it's real interesting. When I did the first book, I know some people have writer's block and stuff like that. The person who did the layout, they're called Tips over in Carborough, and he did the proofreading and whatnot. And I kept adding stuff, and he said, "Jim, you got to stop writing. Your book's done. Stop." And 7 times I added stuff that was just key to it. So it did get to #1 on Kindle, and it's still available there. And I think I'm going to lower the price once the second book comes out, which is about 6 weeks, hopefully. So maybe wait a little bit, get a lower price on that. And here's my contact information. If you look up Faces of Pilot Mountain, there's a whole bunch there also, and then you can email me now. I think when the documentary comes out, I have a feeling my email's just going to explode. So this is a good time to contact me before that happens. So the guy who said that I was out of my mind has now changed his mind, and he wants to have me speak at Cosmic Summit in Greensboro. So it'll be part of 30 international journalists that give talks there, and then he actually wants to do an excursion to Pilot Mountain. And so he's really come around. That's pretty amazing. So yeah, there's the book. Yeah, if I have a few, you can pick it up for $15, and I can autograph them too. So yeah, that's the talk. So are there any questions? I got to apologize. I've got allergies right now, and my hearing is not all that.
Pilot Mountain is probably the only mountaintop in North Carolina that you can't just walk to the top of from one side or another.
Right.
Cliffs go all the way around. In fact, I'm not sure I know of any mountain in the east that's so inaccessible.
Yeah.
I used to go up there to go rock climbing in the 1970s, and there were good rock climbs all the way around.
The Ledge Spring Trail there, yeah.
And at that time, there was a good quality wooden staircase that went to the top.
Well, that ended about 69 or 70. Yeah.
Well, it was there somewhere around 1970. You know, it was a modern wooden staircase that
Right.
was safe to go up.
Made out of chestnut wood, yeah.
Visitors could park above the top. But then they tore down the staircase, and then they banned rock climbing on the pinnacle itself. But it was great while it lasted.
Yeah, the reason they did that, well, it became a national landmark, and that let the federal government have say-so on state land. And it was discovered that there were ravens who were on the east side of the big pinnacle. The climbing was on the west side, quite a ways away. And so they used that excuse to say we should tear that all down. And it turns out in my research, the ravens have been there. The first report I heard was 1849. And at that time, there wasn't a lot known about ravens since 1970. And so one raven expert, and of course an expert is somebody who says they're an expert and you agree with them. So he said that the people going out up there would, you know, the nest would leave. And it's only one of 2 nests in North Carolina. So it is good to be careful about that, but I really wish we could go up there, because everyone, including especially those UNC professors who went up there, they had all their gear and scientific equipment. And he talks about just sitting down and saying, we can't do anything. We're just like overwhelmed with the view here.
There were good blueberries up there, too.
Right, yeah. Yeah, there's talk in the newspapers about that, yeah. And that's part of the reason so many birds are up there too. There's just a ton of birds up there. And they talk about in the 1800s going up for a picnic and not having a lot of trouble finding where to sit because there's so much bird poop. And then they would bother you if you had food, then they'd want to come and share that with us, you know. But yeah, that's interesting. I really wish they would. What I hope they might do and OSHA would have a field day with this going up there. But if they could just have a little platform, kind of like in the Grand Canyon, where you could go up and not actually be on the big pinnacle, but see that view up there, because it's evidently spectacular. But yeah, because you can see, 3,000 square miles. And the Cherokee talk about a star mound that was very important to them. And I'm really wondering if that's what the top of the big pinnacle was, the star mound for them. And they used to go up freeform. There wasn't a ladder or anything. They would just climb up to the top, which I can't imagine doing that. But yeah, any other questions?
What happened to the trees on top of the mountain?
What happened to what?
What happened to the trees on top of the mountain?
There was a fire in November of 2021. And so that is what revealed that notch. See, right under the N there? And that's where the sun rises. And what's interesting, if you ever go, as you're driving towards Pilot Mountain, that whole area didn't have trees when the Native Americans were there. They burned the trees, and they wanted a grassland. And they wanted the grassland because you can go to the top of Pilot Mountain and see where the herds of buffalo and where the herds of deer are. And the grass, they said, was about this high, because when you're riding your horse, you'd be above the grass. And it was a real grassland. It didn't look like it does at all right now. Very, very interesting. And they say that really the entire United States, they used fire to keep everything down. There was nothing, you know how you look in the woods now and it's all brambles and all that. That wasn't the case back then. They kept it like a garden. Really, really interesting. They talk a lot about that, how, in fact, some of the Native American people that I talked to said that Smokey the Bear was the worst propaganda against humans that's ever been done. That fire is your friend. It's only not your friend when you let all the undergrowth get out of control. And like a classic thing in California is that they just leave everything alone instead of using fire. And then everything burns down. So very, very interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I think we have a lot to learn from the Native Americans. My dad was a guide at Chaco Canyon, and he talked about how they would plant corn in the desert, but they would plant it that deep, and that was where the water was. And then the corn would get up there and it would grow, and it would seem like there's no, they get no rain, but it was enough to grow there. They really knew how to deal with the land and whatever they had. So, well, thanks for coming, everybody. Appreciate it. You want to get one? Oh, thank you.